Welcome to this session all about using or adapting a Pearson authorized assignment brief. Firstly, I'll explain what an authorized assignment brief is. Then, I'll take you through each section of the AAB, highlighting the key information you need to be aware of, and more importantly, if you want to adapt or create your own, what you can and cannot change. To help and support you in assessing your students, Pearson have created an AAB for every unit. You can use the AAB as it is, or you can adapt it to meet the needs of your center or students. Or you can even use the AAB as a template to create your own assignment brief. The AAB's front cover will tell you the qualification, unit, and assessment title, so you could adjust the title of the assessment if you're creating your own. We also provide details of any other materials the student will need during their assessment. If you are adapting the AAB or creating your own, you may wish to include information here. After this, there is a list of instructions. Some are generic, so you'll see them on each AAB, and others will be specific to the AAB. Some of the instructions must be retained, even when adapting or creating your own. For example, we suggest students read the AAB carefully. This is always useful to include, and we suggest you retain the statement when adjusting or creating your own. All of the evidence submitted must be the student's own. To reiterate the importance of this, we suggest you keep this statement. You may wish to adjust the number of tasks. This example shows there is one task, but as part of your adjustment, or if creating your own, you may want to make several smaller tasks. You may wish to adjust the evidence requirements, but please note, you can only do this if the evidence is not stated as mandatory. This section of the AB specifies the outcomes for the submission. In the majority of cases, very little adjustment can be made here. So, first, let's consider types of evidence. The specification and AB will state if specific mandatory evidence is required. These must be followed at all times. Where there are no mandatory requirements, you can adjust the type of evidence to support a student's needs. But you must make sure the evidence enables the student to achieve the scope of the assessment criteria. For example, rather than a written assignment, a student could demonstrate their knowledge through a presentation, which is recorded and submitted as their evidence, or an observation of a task that includes a question and answer follow-up to confirm the student's knowledge and understanding. Similar to the front cover, authentication that the student's work is their own is reiterated here. Now let's look at sources. Students are allowed to use external sources to generate ideas, build a concept, back up and justify a statement, but these sources must be referenced and not claimed as their own work. Finally, let's discuss support. As their teacher, you are allowed to support your students. They may have questions about the assessment, the tasks, or what the command verb means. You can offer support to help your students understand what the assessment or tasks are asking them to do. For example, you might need to explain what is meant by describing something, rather than writing a list or identifying. You can also help them understand the types of evidence they could create and support students to adapt evidence so it meets their needs. And you can give them advice on the resources or external sources they could use. For example, is internet access permitted, useful web or YouTube sites, or certain policies or processes that might be important to look at. But what you must not do is give them instruction on what to put into their evidence or any feedback on how to improve their work. At the start of each task, there is the introductory context. The example on the left is taken from the BTEC Level 2 Technical Occupational Entry Qualification in Leading Community Activity. In this unit, students lead an activity and evaluate its success. And you can see this within the tasks in the introductory context. Therefore, to meet the assessment criteria, you should not adjust the tasks of leading or evaluating. However, what you might want to adjust is the context. You could make the context more relevant or familiar for the student. For example, it could align to some work experience or voluntary activity they undertake. So rather than a community holiday club, it could be an after-school club at a primary school, a mobility session at a local community hospital, or an introductory activity session at an athletics club. Or you could make the sport more specific. For example, if you deliver your qualification as part of a football academy, the sports leadership activities could all be through football. The example on the right is taken from the BTC Level 2 Technical Occupational Entry Qualification for Early Years Practitioners. This task is about understanding the policies and procedures that inform the statutory requirements in the sector. Therefore, there is very little point in adjusting the context here. However, what you could adjust is the form of evidence in the task. You can see the task refers to an information file to train new members of staff. You could adjust this to support your students' learning needs. For example, rather than an information file, they could create a presentation, a selection of short training videos or clips, or infographics or leaflets. The example on the left is from the unit we discussed on the previous slide about leading a community activity session. Take note of the mandatory evidence requirement. There must be an observation record, for example, a witness statement, or video evidence of the student leading the activity. This mandatory requirement must not be adjusted. The rest of the evidence is optional and can be adjusted, so it's presented in a format that best suits the student's needs and enables them to demonstrate the assessment criteria. The example on the right is taken from the BTEC Level 2 Technical Occupational Entry Qualification for Lean Manufacturing Operatives. You'll notice there is no mandatory evidence requirement. What we have suggested are the types of evidence that could be used, meaning you and your students can select evidence that best suits their needs, learning style, or the context of the assessment. Now, let's have a quick recap. Firstly, let's remind ourselves of what you must not adjust. The mandatory evidence requirements. If you do, there's a risk the AAB will no longer meet the requirements of the unit, putting your students at risk. Retain information that all evidence must be the student's own work. This is confirmed by the completion of the authentication sheet. And finally, don't change any information about referencing source material or the type of support you can offer the student. Now let's look at what you can adjust. You can change the optional evidence to support your students' needs. You can amend the context of the assessment, perhaps making it more specific to your local environment or student's experience. You can also change the number of tasks. Thank you for your time today. I really hope you found this session helpful. Don't forget to check out the rest of our support for our post-16 Level 2 vocational qualifications, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.